Welcome to the Happy Soap Group channel. You're watching an introduction to soap making. My name is Tyrese Joseph. I'm the owner and artisan at ADO Handmade Soaps. You can find out more about my products at www.adosoaps.com. Okay, let's start with what is soap. The FDA defines soap as the end result of combining fats, oils, and butters with an alkali, such as lye, which you will sometimes see as sodium hydroxide or potassium hydroxide. Sodium hydroxide is what we use to make our bar soap, and potassium hydroxide, KOH, is what you use to make your liquid soap. For the purposes of what we're doing today, we're going to be using the sodium hydroxide. Through a process called saponification, your butters, oils, and fats and your lye are converted into soap and glycerin. Glycerin is a byproduct of the process. If your recipe is properly formulated and you've weighed everything out correctly, there is no lye remaining in your soap. To get started soap making, you will need a variety of tools and accessories. Here is a list of what I recommend that you need at a minimum and where you can purchase them. The easiest way to make soap, in my opinion, is to be prepared for the project that you're starting. So I suggest that you gather all the tools that you're going to need, all the ingredients, all your additives, your colors, your oils, your tools, anything that you're going to need during the process, so you don't have to keep running around and getting frantic, especially if your soap happens to start moving fast or things aren't going the way you plan. Then you don't have to run around looking for everything because it should be right here. So I'm a huge advocate of setting everything up. Okay, so before we get started, you have to run your recipe or create your recipe inside of a soap calculator. Using a calculator will give you the appropriate amounts of lye that you need to make your soap. If you have too little lye, then your soap will never set up. If you have too much lye, then your soap will burn or irritate the skin, and we don't want that. Other things that your soap calculator will do, it will also give you the properties of your soap. That's important because that will help you to fine-tune your recipe to see what impact each ingredient, each oil or fat has on your end soap. And it's also a great tool that you can use to keep track of your recipes, to find out what worked for you, what didn't work for you, to make notes. You know, there's nothing more frustrating than creating a perfect recipe and then you forget exactly how you did it. So soap calculators are a must. I prefer to use the one at soapcalc.net, and I'll show you how to use that real quick and then we'll get started. SoapCalc is an online free calculator that will help you determine the amount of lye that you need to use in your soap recipe, water amounts, and other information that you may find useful, as well as a way to track your recipe and make any notes that you wish. Okay? So, this is where you would find it. It's soapcalc.net. And once you're on that page, you're going to go to the recipe calculator. Okay, so now that we're on the recipe calculator, you can see, I'm just going to scroll through, it may look a little bit intimidating. But after this, I can assure you, it will be perfect, it'll be really easy to understand. It looks confusing, but it's actually not. You just need to take the categories one at a time. Okay? So here, it's going to ask you what type of lye are you using. Now we know that to make a bar soap, you're going to be using sodium hydroxide. If you were making a soft recipe like a soft soap or a liquid soap, you were using potassium hydroxide. But we're going to be using sodium hydroxide, and it's already pre-checked for us. Next, it's going to ask you exactly how much are you making. What's the size of your batch, the oil portion. So you just need to tell it how much you're going to make. Just to keep things simple, let's just say you want to do a 2-pound batch. And that is about what will fit into my silicone 8-inch mold. Here, it asks you for your water. Now, I find it much easier to go ahead and select a ratio. So I'm going to go do the ratio, and I do 2 to 1. That will be your full, what I consider to be full water. You can also go and you can do 1.5. Okay. But to show you what I did for this recipe was formulated using a 1 to 1 ratio. Okay. Then over here, under 4, you're going to tell it what you want to superfat at and at what usage rate you want to use for your fragrance. For your superfat, 5% is adequate. You can choose to up it or lower it as you determine. I often work with a 6% superfat. As for your fragrance amount, when you're using fragrance oils, a half ounce per pound of oils is considered to be, I guess, relatively normal. But always double check that against what the manufacturer states for the as a usage rate for that particular fragrance oil. Generally, a half ounce per pound of oils is within the safety range. This is especially important when you're talking about using essential oils in your soap versus using a fragrance oil. The essential oil usage rates will vary significantly more. So just be sure that you can leave this as is, but just do yourself the favor of double checking and finding out what the actual usage rate is for the fragrance or essential oil type that you're using. Okay, so that's number 4. Okay, so down here, soap quality, this is the fatty acid profile, okay? So for any given oil that you see here, oils, fats, and waxes, if you select any of these, let's say you want to look at apricot kernel, okay? So over here it's going to tell you the hardness, the cleansing, conditioning values, bubbly, creamy, the iodine numbers, INS, as well as all the fatty acid profiles that you need here. You can use this to click on an oil to help formulate a recipe. So let's say you have, 10 different oils and fats and butters to choose from. You can come in here and you can get an idea of what each one of those is going to add to your soap. It's a guideline, though. We have to realize that this is just a guideline. The numbers aren't absolute, and SoapCalc, SoapCalc doesn't always know exactly how they're all going to work together. So just remember that this is a rough estimate of what you can expect from your soap, and there are some exceptions to that rule, which I'll talk about in a minute. Okay, so essentially, what we're going to do, I'm going to use the recipe that can be found on the Happy Soap Group's Facebook page in the Files section, and it's called a beginner recipe. So that recipe has olive oil, lard, coconut oil, shea butter, avocado, and castor. So we're going to go to this list here, and we're going to find olive oil. So we just scroll down, and you're going to choose olive oil. Okay? Over here you can see some of the properties that it offers. Olive oil is that exception that I was telling you about. It says it has a hardness of 17. However, you will find that olive oil actually cures out to a very hard bar. And it's the only soft oil that you can use up to 100% in your soap without getting a squishy, mushy bar. Okay? So that's the olive oil bar, right? And then we're going to go over here and we're going to add that oil. We're going to go over to the number 6 box and add the oil. So see, olive oil is down here and we need to tell it how much. For the beginner recipe, we know that we want 40% olive oil. The next oil on our list is lard. So we're going to go up here and we're going to choose lard. But I didn't choose lard, okay? I added laurel fruit. Just to show you how you can fix a mistake. I don't want laurel fruit. So here where it says remove, just go put the line number that you want removed. In this case, it's line number 2. And just click remove. And it's gone. Okay? But we do want lard. And we're going to go and add that to the list. And we want our lard at 20%. The next item on our list is coconut oil. Let's scroll up to coconut oil. And you're likely going to want to be choosing the 76 degree. This is your standard coconut oil that you most likely have access to. So you're going to go and you're going to add that. And again, we want this at 15%. And our next one is a butter. It's shea butter. which we will find right here. We're going to add that, and our recipe says that you want it at 10%. And we have avocado oil. Just scroll back up, find your avocado, add that. The recipe tells us we want it at 10%. And then we want to go down to castor, and we're going to add that, okay? And we're going to add that at 5%. Okay, so that's your number 6. And really, we're done. So you just want to calculate that recipe. It'll let you know that your totals add up to 100%. And there's your total weight. Okay? And then all you have to do, scroll down just a little bit more, is click View or Print Recipe. And you see it opens up a new window. In this recipe, you can go ahead and you can name it. Let's call this Beginner Soap Recipe. But you can call it whatever you like. Here, you also see that for labeling purposes, you have the INCI names for your ingredients. So if you want to click that, it will take you to another window, and you can see the INCI name for all of your ingredients. And it also shows you the order in which it should appear on your label for cosmetic labeling purposes. So I'm going to go back over here. Okay, so let's look at this now. This is going to be what you are going to need to craft your recipe. So it gives you the total oil weight. It shows you water as a percent of your oil weight. It shows you what your superfat is, at 6%. Your lye concentration is 50%, and that's because we did a 1-to-1 ratio. So you have all the numbers that you would have collected from the profile. And there's a saturated, unsaturated ratio, and you have your iodine, INS, your fragrance weight, okay? So this will tell you, from this, what you really want to pay attention to is your fragrance weight right here. So when you go to make your recipe, you're going to be using either pounds, ounces, or grams. It doesn't matter. It's up to you, but it gives you the value for all of those. And it tells you how much lye you're going to use based on your batch size and the oils that you chose. And then here's your oil weight. So we've got 2 pounds, 32 ounces, or 907 grams. And then how much fragrance that is based on the usage rate that you selected. And down here you actually see the measurements for your individual oils. And the great thing about SoapCalc is that you can resize anything when you're using percentages, because the percentages don't change. So whether I made a 2-pound batch or whether I went back in and I did a 60-pound batch, it doesn't matter. The ratio of the recipe will remain consistent. So it's a really good idea to work off of your percentages. So for this recipe, we're going to be using 12.8 ounces of olive oil, 6.4 ounces of lard, 4.8 coconut, 3.2 in shea, 3.2 in avocado, 1.6 in castor, for a total of 32. Okay. Now if we scroll down, you can see the qualities that your bar will likely exhibit. It is not a perfect thing, but it does give you a really good basis to work off of when you're crafting your own recipe. You have your hardness right here. So they give you like the range that you can expect your soap to fall in. You've got cleansing. Your cleansing, they suggest you'd want it between a 12 and 22. This is a 10, which is a perfect number, because cleansing doesn't mean that your soap is cleaning or not cleaning. It's more about whether your soap is stripping, how well it strips oils, and that would include your natural oils. So keeping it toward the low end of the scale is generally a good idea. You've got your conditioning number, which shows it's exactly what it says, how conditioning your recipe is. And you'll find that your soft oils are most responsible for boosting that number. And then you've got bubbly. It says it's a 15. Here I caution though, because recipes, this number can be misleading. You will find that this recipe will actually give you more than adequate lather. If you're unhappy with the lather, you will be looking at bumping up your coconut oil, but by doing so, coconut oil will also lend to the stripping properties and will raise this cleansing number. But that's, of course, a personal preference, and you can decide how you want to proceed. But even though this is on the low end of that range, you will find that it is actually bubbly. You got creamy, which will kind of tell you what type of texture your lather will have. And these two numbers, I'm one of those soapers that I don't pay a whole lot of attention to these two numbers. These are supposed to possibly indicate how hard your bar will wind up based on these two numbers. But for the purposes of this video, these are the ones you want to look at: your hardness, cleansing, conditioning, bubbly, and creamy. I would encourage you to take a look at these fatty acids over here, just as to expand your own understanding on how to formulate your recipe. Each one of these fatty acids is going to lend a different type of property to your soap. You're going to find that your stearic acid is going to harden. You're going to find your oleic is very conditioning. So it's a good idea to get familiar with these, and you can find out a lot more about these individual fatty acid profiles and how they affect your soap. And that was the tutorial on how to input a recipe into SoapCalc. So as we talked about before, we're going to get ready and we're going to put on our glasses. And we've got our gloves. Now, normally you would want to prep by melting your oils that you're going to use for your project beforehand, and also measuring out your lye solution and letting it cool. When you make your lye solution, you are going to always want to make sure that you are pouring slowly your lye into your water and not the other way around. It's going to produce a reaction that's going to produce a lot of heat and fumes, so you want to make sure that you do that in a properly ventilated area or outside. I actually did that step earlier, and so what you're going to be left with is a thick, viscous kind of liquid. It's going to be kind of thick, thicker than your water is, but this has been perfectly cool to room temperature. I make it a point when I soap to use a 1-to-1 ratio with my lye solution. What that means is that I use 1 part or equal parts water or whatever liquid you're going to use and lye. There are certain advantages and disadvantages to soaping with a ratio of 1-to-1, so please check out our in-depth video on water discounting to go over that in greater detail. You want to make sure you melt everything down and allow it to come to room temperature before you proceed. I did that step earlier as well, and this is what I'm left with. So today I planned out a fun soap for us to do. I've been dying to try out this Brambleberry fragrance. It's Coconut Citrus Sorbet, which is a nice tropical scent. To emphasize the tropical aspects of it, I've got some papaya extract, I've got some Tangerine Dream, and we're going to use some coconut milk. Okay, when I make soap, I prefer to add as many of my additives to my oils before adding my lye solution. Okay, so let's get started. I'm just getting a base weight for my oils because the one thing I didn't measure beforehand was my silk amino acids, which I use at 0.25. I'm also going to add in my coconut milk. I'm going to add in the papaya extract. I'm going to add in my color, which is, like I said, I already prepped that ahead of time. And lastly, I'm going to add in my fragrance, which smells really, really, really good. I'm going to do okay, so now that I have all my additives in, I'm going to move the scale out of the way. Back over here. Go ahead and turn that off. I'm going to grab my stick blender. Isn't that a pretty color? Kind of looks like sorbet. And mixing in things like your fragrance, for instance, ahead of time of from your lye, actually gives your it gives you a better chance of not having your soap seize. It gives you more time to work. So moving right along, I pre-measured my lye. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to pour that in. You don't necessarily want to overwork it. You want to blend it to emulsion, and that's the point at which your lye and your oils are combined and are not going to separate out. You do not have to wait for trace, although sometimes it's desirable depending on the type of soap design that you're working with. Now, like I said, I soap at room temperature, so I don't bother taking temperature of the soap batter itself. And with a well-behaved fragrance, I have plenty of time to work, sometimes too much time. I want to leave it on its side so I can avoid dragging the seeds through the soap and leaving marks. I'm going to bring down the cutter. And